What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
Welcome back to our second episode of our bonus series on changing jobs in today's post-pandemic environment.
In the first episode, we provided like a top 10 list, or at least 10 things to consider before you say yes to a new job opportunity. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to expand a little bit more on what we defined as the foundational criteria to consider. And so we'll get a little deeper in those areas. So Kim, why don't you kick us off on what you think is probably one of the most important things to consider when it comes to foundational items.
Okay. And as we backtrack, foundation, when I hear the word foundation, I think, what is taking them so long to build that new house? And because it seems like they spend half of the time just digging dirt and putting cement down on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And we know that, especially here in California, that foundation is the most important thing because we have earthquakes here. And if we don't have a solid foundation, that house may fall apart. And so the same thing holds true with your foundational benefits. I urge you, I repeat this because it's so important. This is the stuff that everybody just glosses over and doesn't pay attention to. And this is the stuff that is most important when you're building your foundation in finances, especially as you have a family. And we want to tie these also to your goals. And so we realize that your goals will be different if you are young and just getting started, or if this is your final gig before you are planning on retiring. So we definitely want you to think about who you are and where you want to go in the next 5 years with this next job. I also want you to think about the next 5 years, because between now and 5 years from now, which is 2027, I am quite sure, even though I don't have a crystal ball, I'm very sure that we're going to have a recession in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And this is why this episode is so important right now, is the job market has been very strong. And we think that employees are still in charge here, but things are changing and things can change fast. Mm-hmm. And so what you need to be realizing is that companies typically use LIFO for periods of recessions when they want to do layoffs. So LIFO is last in, first out. So be very careful if your job changing now. In the next couple of years, we probably will have a recession. Are you going to be the first on that hit list?
Mm-hmm. Whoa. Well, I mean, it's true. The fact is that a lot of it will obviously depend on the demand for your role, and how specialized you are. So if you work in an environment where there's, you're one of many software developers, right? Or are you someone who's, let's say, like a data scientist who's very specific, who has a very core set of skills that are very difficult to replace? So I think that when you start thinking about LIFO, last in, first out, part of it is, am I coming in with the company see me, I hate to say it, but almost as like a commodity, a replaceable commodity that we can always add more or get rid of more? Or are you working in an area, are you a specialist or something that is so important to any organization that there is some job security where maybe that's less of a concern?
And I think this is really important right now. We can say, we can advise our clients when they're job transitioning to take a look at the company earnings and take a look at the history of that company. Have they done large layoffs in the past? What's their turnover look like typically during a recession? You can go back to 2008, 2009, or you can go back to 2019 and 2020 and see, were these companies really quick to lay people off, or did they have no layoffs? And then that may be a cultural thing that they do their best and to not lay people off during bad times. And I say that because it's also a good time for companies, even if they're in good financial position. A recession is a good excuse to clean house. And so right now we have a situation where people in a lot of jobs across the country have been working from home. And I think companies know some people are taking advantage of that and not being as productive. So I think this is another angle where recession comes, companies have an excuse to lay off, and those that have been least productive in an at-home environment may be the ones to go.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to what you had said earlier, taking a look at a history of a company and how they handle slowdowns and whether or not they do mass layoffs, I think should be something that you really want to take a look at. And the strength of the company. Now, there's been a lot of companies, and I won't mention names, but there's a streaming service very popular that was doing great during the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, as subscriptions started to drop, they started letting people go. So even if the company is doing well, is no guarantee that they're going to continue to do well. And so part of that has to do with, taking the companies that you are looking to work. Is their business seasonal? And how vulnerable could it be to, changes? And how does it resist? Is it something that's going to be able to plow through?
Right. And here's where we take a look at age too and factor that into your job as well. There's a lot of research out there that says Gen Z doesn't want to work at home. And I remember being that age group of young, just graduated from college. I wanted to go into the office because we had a great work environment. I had all my friends there in the new city that I was, and we were going out every night, and that was fun. That's what Gen Z wants from their job right now. They're also the least experienced, and so companies can get away paying them less than the millennials who are now family, part of a family, and their needs are different than Gen Z. Because if you're building a family, you want to be there for the soccer games, you're shuttling kids right and left. I remember when I was in that age range, working from home was the best because I had built up a social network through kids' activities. And so I think it's very normal for the millennials to want to work at home. And they are in a higher level now, and so they are actually being paid more than Gen Z. Mm-hmm. And then, lastly, we talk about the youngest of the baby boomers, who are actually, and Gen X. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about us. But you look at that third wave of employees who are closer to retirement. The baby boomers are retiring in a high level right now. And really, it's funny because when you look at the high employment numbers, part of the reason why they're high employment numbers is because there are a lot more baby boomers retiring and not looking for work than there are backfilling those jobs. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes the employment numbers are funny when you're just looking at a percentage. You actually have to look behind the numbers to really see what's going on. And Gen X too, we're for the most part have older kids that are self-sufficient, independent. They may be driving, they may be in college and don't need us as much. And so now we do need more social outlets from our work environments. And so you've got different generations wanting different things because of where they are in life. And I think that plays into this whole idea. If corporations really want to bring people back into the workplace, but are having a hard time because they don't know where to start, well, they're going to start with the graduating classes out there. Mm-hmm.
And I think that, part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because I think the workplace was already undergoing a massive transformation. And the pandemic just accelerated this transformation because so many organizations discovered that they can still keep their doors open and continue to operate even if it means a large share of the workforce wasn't in an office. And so what that presented is a number of different options from a company perspective and saying, do we need 2 or 3 floors in a building in order to operate when people can and want to work from home? The other thing that it made for a lot of corporations is saying, does our talent need to be local? Is there a software developer in Montana or South Dakota or Knoxville, Tennessee, going to be able to do the same job that somebody who's in the Silicon Valley can do? And because they live in a different area that is not with such a high cost of living, can we pay them less?
Right. And so we are seeing that happen, salaries changing because of where you live. So be mindful of that, because as we get closer and closer to a recession, this is going to become very important to corporations and who they're hiring. And just because you had leverage 6 months ago doesn't mean you have leverage 2 months from now.
So a whole lot more to think about, when it comes to making job transitions and, trying to make the decision as to whether or not it's a good time to move.
That's right. So let's move on now to the insurance area. And insurance really covers, health insurance, family benefits, which more and more companies are having family benefits that are not insurance related, but it does equal money. I mean, if you are a guy and you and your spouse are thinking about having a baby and, you're in a modern company that's giving fathers time off. Wow, that's wonderful. And so you want to think about that. It's only really an issue if you're going to have a baby, but if you're not, maybe that's not so important to you. So this is why you want to compare and contrast and compare them to your own family needs. Adoption benefits as well. In vitro, a lot of people are having kids later in life, which means it's harder to get pregnant. And so if you have benefits that will allow for that, that's really nice as well.
And I think going to the actual traditional insurance, whether it's disability insurance or life insurance benefits that are being offered to the employee, a large part of that has to do with the type of work that you're doing. So obviously if you're doing work where there is a risk of some sort of dismemberment or where you could be disabled, you want to make sure that package is, spot on and going to meet, your needs. And then for a lot of people, especially if they're in their first job, second job, or third job, so basically in the early part of their career, having life insurance benefits to help supplement, the income or make up for the income in the case that something should happen to you. You want to make sure that, your family's taken care of and that you're able to pay the mortgage and that you're not leaving a burden on your family. And I think that a lot of those life insurance policies that are offered through your employer are usually a multiplier on your salary. So figure out, what would be the best multiplier for you. And since most of that insurance doesn't require a health or health checkup, it's probably some of the best insurance you can get.
Right. And if we, while we're talking about insurance, life insurance and disability, the statistics are that you are more likely to become disabled than prematurely die. And so again, disability insurance, people don't pay any attention to, thinking that nothing is ever going to happen to them. And this is even more expensive if you're disabled and can't work. It could be a costlier situation than even premature death. But again, it matters whether you have a family that you need to look after. You really want to make sure that you're not, if you're the main or the larger breadwinner or even the secondary breadwinner, both jobs are important, and making sure that if you are no longer there, their income will be protected for the long term is really important. And this is also another area where, bring in your advocates, your advisors and whatnot, because that's what our job is in financial planning and giving advice to our clients, is really about talking about these issues and making sure that your foundation, before we talk about the money and the investments, it's making sure that your foundation is in good shape.
That's absolutely right.
And, health benefits too. There's in family benefits, again, that also goes into one more thing that I think is really important for those having kids, is like the daycare Is there flexible care accounts? And because I remember that was expensive, having kids in daycare. And so if this is something you're going to need, some companies are better at that than others, and it's good to know.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole lot to, consider and evaluate before you say yes, and, just doing a little deeper dive in those areas. But as Kim had pointed out, it's not a decision that you need to make on your own. So obviously consult family, friends, your spouse, your advisors. And like I said in the previous podcast, if you know someone who works at this organization, they are probably going to be your best resource to tell you the real deal about what it means to work there.
Right. And I will say, if there's one thing, and I'm not going to talk political at all, but if there's one thing that, Roe versus Wade has done is open people's eyes to corporate benefits, because corporations have come out there and made announcements about their policies in a wide range of issues for families. And so now I think it is gaining more popularity. What's my company doing? And it's out there. And so you want to definitely take everything into consideration and figure out where you're going from there.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing that's there, which I think is falls into values, is the company a good citizen? I mean, is it a good citizen of its local community? Is it supportive of different charities and events, or on a national scale? Is it something that has a good reputation? I mean, it may not make the decision for you, but I think it's everything, matters. One of the reasons we chose, full disclosure, one of the reasons we chose to work with Cambridge Investment Research was because we align with the values. Integrity was huge. The fact that they put kindness in one, that spoke to us. And so that's another thing too. When you're doing your evaluation, make sure that the values of the organization align with your own.
Yeah, that's one of those that can be shocking probably afterwards. Is, I should have realized that, because look, their values aren't mine, and at some point that may cause friction. So I think that wraps up the foundational top 4 things to look at, which again are those health and family benefits, the financial viability of a company, either by checking company earnings and news announcements, or by looking at their funding if they are a private and startup type of company. You want to check their turnover, and you want to look at all your insurance benefits. That's both life and disability.
That's right. So in the next podcast, in which we'll complete this 3-part series on changing jobs in today's post-pandemic environment, we're going to look at what I would say is probably Kim's favorite, actually real favorite, which is the wealth building side of things, and how you can get the most bang for your buck in making a very smart move to another organization or company, because you are going to benefit financially by making that change, which is why most people do it in the first place.
Right. And, everybody has a different level of risk, and we should understand that when you're making all of these choices. It's always a give and get kind of comparison. And lastly, I just want to say, because I forgot, is when you're in transition, just make sure you have a good emergency reserves bucket, just in case there is a recession or a layoff situation in your next company. It may be okay if you have a large reserves that gets you through 6 to 12 months.
Okay, so we will see you in the 3rd podcast. Just stay tuned for that, which will focus on wealth building when it comes to transition. So thank you for joining us again. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out to us through our social media channels or directly at techgirlfinancial.com. Talk to you soon.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. TechGirl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research Inc. are not affiliated companies. Discussions in the show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions.